The obsidian walls of the tribunal chamber rose high into the darkness above, and Commander Elias Vance stood alone in a circle of cold blue light. His wrists were bound with energy cuffs that hummed against his skin, and 12 Velthari judges stared down at him from their elevated seats with eyes like yellow glass. He had been standing there for 3 hours now, waiting for them to decide his fate, and his legs ached from the strain. The Velthari were a patient species, cold-blooded in both body and temperament, and they seemed to enjoy watching him suffer in small ways before they announced the larger suffering to come. Human pilot Elias Vance, the High Arbiter, finally spoke, her voice echoing through the vast chamber like stones dropping into still water. You have been found guilty of trespassing into Dominion space. Your vessel crossed our border without permission, and this crime demands punishment. Elias wanted to argue that his ship had been damaged, that he had no choice, that the border crossing was an emergency, but he had learned in his weeks of captivity that the Velthari did not care about reasons or excuses. They cared only about rules, and he had broken one of their most sacred laws. The penalty for your crime is death, the High Arbiter continued, and Elias felt his stomach drop even though he had expected this. However, the Dominion Council has decided that your death should serve a greater purpose than simple execution. A murmur ran through the chamber, and Elias noticed that the walls had begun to glow with projection screens. Thousands of Velthari faces appeared, watching from across the Dominion, and he realized with growing horror that this was being broadcast to their entire civilization. Humans believe they are special, the High Arbiter declared, her thin lips curling into something that might have been a smile. Your species spreads across the galaxy like a disease, claiming that you can adapt to any world, survive any hardship. We find this belief amusing and incorrect. She gestured with one clawed hand, and a holographic image appeared in the air beside Elias. It showed a planet with swirling green and brown clouds, its surface marked by vast fungal forests and jagged mountain ranges. This is Kareth 7, the High Arbiter explained, a world within our territory that we have deemed unsuitable for colonization. The temperature swings between extreme heat and deadly cold every day. Acid rain falls for entire seasons, and the wildlife has evolved to kill anything that moves. Elias studied the planet, his pilot's mind automatically cataloging details. He noticed the thick atmosphere, the signs of geothermal activity, the abundant plant life that suggested a complex ecosystem. You will be taken to this world and left there, the High Arbiter announced, and the watching crowds on the screens erupted in excited sounds. You will be given no technology, no tools, no shelter materials. You will have only the primitive body that evolution gave you. And the clothes on my back? Elias asked, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. Natural fibers only, the High Arbiter confirmed. We are not cruel enough to leave you naked, but we will strip away every advantage your species has stolen from the universe. No metal, no plastic, no synthetic materials of any kind. She leaned forward, her yellow eyes gleaming with anticipation. We will watch as you struggle and fail. We will broadcast your suffering to every corner of the Dominion. And when you finally die cold and hungry and alone, every species in the galaxy will see the truth about humanity. And what truth is that? Elias asked. That you are nothing without your machines, the High Arbiter hissed. That your species is weak, fragile, and utterly dependent on technology you barely understand. That human adaptability is a myth created by human arrogance. The chamber fell silent, and every eye turned to Elias, waiting for him to beg or cry or collapse in despair. The Velthari had seen many species react to such sentences, and they expected the same show of weakness that others had displayed. But Elias Vance did something that none of them expected. He smiled, not a forced or desperate smile, but a genuine expression of something that looked almost like relief. Is something amusing to you, human? The High Arbiter demanded, her voice sharp with irritation. "I was just thinking about history," Elias replied calmly. "Specifically, I was thinking about how different our species really are." "Explain yourself." Elias looked up at the 12 judges, then at the thousands of faces watching on the screens, and he spoke in a clear voice that carried through the entire chamber. "The Veltari evolved on a paradise world. Your planet had stable temperatures, gentle seasons, and abundant food. You developed technology because you were comfortable enough to have time for thinking." The High Arbiter's eyes narrowed, but she did not interrupt. "Humans evolved on a world that tried to kill us every single day," Elias continued. "We survived ice ages that lasted thousands of years. We crossed deserts and mountains and oceans with nothing but our legs and our minds. We ate anything that did not eat us first." He held up his bound hands, showing his blunt fingernails and soft skin. "You see weakness when you look at this body, but you do not understand what it represents. These hands have built shelters from snow and sand and leaves. These legs have walked across continents. This brain has solved problems that your computers cannot even imagine." "Enough of this boasting," the High Arbiter snapped. "Words will not save you on Kurith 7. "You are right," Elias agreed with that same unsettling smile. "Words will not save me. Knowledge will." Guards stepped forward to drag him away, and as they pulled him toward the chamber doors, a young Veltari diplomat called out one final question. "Why are you smiling, human? Do you not understand that you are going to die?" Elias looked back over his shoulder, and his answer echoed through the chamber long after he was gone. "Your ancestors climbed out of warm oceans onto comfortable shores. Mine crawled out of ice ages and learned to thrive in frozen wastelands. You think you are sending me to hell, but you are actually sending me home." The doors closed behind him, and the tribunal chamber fell into confused silence. Several of the younger Veltari exchanged uncertain looks, wondering if perhaps they had made a terrible mistake, but the High Arbiter dismissed their doubts with a wave of her hand. "Prepare the transport," she ordered. "In 1 week, the human will be dead, and the galaxy will finally understand the truth about his pathetic species." She was wrong about many things that day, but she was most wrong about that. The shuttle dropped Elias onto a rocky plateau just as the sun was rising, and he stood there for a long moment watching the alien craft disappear into the green-tinted sky. 3 small drones remained behind, hovering at a distance with their camera eyes fixed on him, and he knew that millions of Veltari were watching his every move. The air was thick and warm, carrying strange smells that reminded him of mushrooms and copper and something else he could not identify. All around the plateau, a vast forest of giant fungal growths stretched toward the horizon, their purple and gray caps rising higher than any trees on Earth. Elias took a deep breath and pushed away the fear that was trying to crawl up from his stomach. He had 10 hours before sunset, and the Veltari briefing had made it very clear that nighttime temperatures would drop to deadly levels. If he did not have shelter and fire by then, he would be dead before morning. But instead of running around in a panic, Elias sat down on a flat rock and simply watched the world around him. The drones buzzed closer, their operators confused by his stillness in the Veltari Observation Center. Hundreds of light years away, a room full of analysts stared at their screens with growing frustration. "What is he doing?" one of them demanded. "Why is he not building something?" "Perhaps he has accepted his fate," another suggested. "Perhaps he is simply waiting to die." But Elias was doing something far more important than building or dying. He was learning. His eyes moved slowly across the landscape, noting the direction of the wind by watching how the fungal cap swayed. He observed the small creatures that scurried between rocks, paying attention to which plants they ate and which ones they avoided. He studied the clouds forming on the distant mountains, reading the weather patterns in their shapes and movements. After an hour of watching, Elias stood up and began to walk. He moved carefully down from the plateau, testing the ground with each step, and the drones followed him like mechanical vultures waiting for him to fall. He found a stream first, following the faint sound of running water through the fungal forest. The water was clear and cold, and he watched small fish-like creatures swimming in the shallows before he drank. If the water was safe for local life, it would probably be safe for him too, near the stream. He discovered a type of reed that grew in thick clusters along the banks. He pulled one up and examined it closely, testing the fibers by trying to tear them apart. They were strong and flexible, perfect for making rope and cord. "Excellent," he said to himself, marking the location in his memory. He continued exploring, and with each discovery, his confidence grew. He found a cliff face with natural overhangs that would provide shelter from rain and wind. He found flat stones that broke into sharp edges when he struck them together, giving him the material for cutting tools. He found thermal vents that released warm air from deep underground, suggesting geothermal heat that could keep him warm at night. By midday, Elias had chosen his campsite, a south-facing hollow in the cliff where a thermal vent provided warmth and the overhang protected against the elements. It was not perfect, but it was good enough to survive his first night. Now the real work began. He returned to the stream and gathered armfuls of the strong reeds, carrying them back to his campsite in bundles. He found dry fungal material on the forest floor, dead caps that had fallen and dried in the sun, and he collected as much as he could carry. He searched for stones with the right shape and weight, selecting some for tools and others for heating. The drones recorded everything, and the Valkyrie analysts began to argue among themselves about what they were seeing. "He's just gathering random materials," one insisted. "There is no pattern to his behavior. Look at how he tests each item before collecting it," another disagreed. "He is selecting based on specific qualities. This is not random at all." Elias ignored the buzzing machines and focused on his work. He used 2 pieces of stone to create a simple cutting tool, striking them together at precise angles until one had a sharp edge. With this tool, he cut reeds into cordage and stripped bark from fallen fungal trunks. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, the temperature started dropping rapidly. Elias could see his breath forming clouds in the cooling air, and he knew he had only hours left before the cold became deadly. He built a fire first, using a technique that humans had developed thousands of years ago. He found a piece of soft, dry fungal wood and a hotter stick, and he began spinning the stick between his palms while pressing it into the softer piece. Friction created heat, heat created smoke, and smoke eventually became a tiny ember. The Valkyrie analysts leaned forward in their seats, their yellow eyes wide with disbelief. "He's creating fire without any technology," one whispered. "How is this possible?" "It should not be possible," another replied. "Fire requires ignition sources, fuel ratios, oxygen management. He has none of these tools." But Elias had something better than tools. He had knowledge passed down through countless generations. Knowledge that lived in his hands and his instincts, even when his conscious mind forgot the details. He blew gently on the ember, feeding it with tiny pieces of dried material, and within minutes he had a small but steady fire burning. With fire secured, he built his shelter. He leaned large pieces of bark against the cliff face, creating a slanted roof that would shed rain and trap heat. He stuffed the gaps with dried fungal material, creating insulation against the cold. He placed heated stones from the fire inside the shelter, creating a thermal mass that would release warmth slowly through the night. When darkness finally fell and the temperature plummeted, Elias crawled into his shelter and wrapped himself in layers of dried plant material. It was not comfortable, and he shivered despite the heat from his fire and stones, but he was alive. Throughout the long night, he fed the fire and replaced cooled stones with hot ones, keeping the temperature inside his shelter just warm enough to survive. The drones hovered outside, recording his vital signs and transmitting data back to the observation center. He should be dead, a Valkyrie supervisor said flatly, staring at the readings. The temperature has dropped to -40 degrees. No unprotected organism should survive this. But he is not unprotected, the elderly scholar replied softly. She had been watching in silence for hours, and now she spoke with a tone of quiet amazement. He built protection from nothing. He created technology from raw nature. This is not mere survival. This is engineering. The supervisor scoffed at her words, but the scholar kept watching the screen with troubled eyes. She had spent her entire career studying other species, and she had never seen anything like this before. When the sun rose the next morning, Elias emerged from his shelter tired but alive. He stretched his stiff muscles and looked around at the frozen landscape, already planning his next improvements. He had survived one night, but he intended to do much more than just survive. He intended to thrive. And somewhere in the Valkyrie Observation Center, the elderly scholar began searching through ancient archives, looking for records of her own species from millions of years ago, wondering if perhaps her ancestors had once known the same knowledge that this strange human seemed to carry in his bones. 3 months had passed since Elias Vance was abandoned on Korath 7, and the Valkyrie observation team had long since stopped predicting his death. What they witnessed on their screens now was something that defied everything they believed about primitive species. Where once there had been only a rocky cliff face with a crude lean-to shelter, there now stood a complex of structures that seemed to have grown naturally from the landscape. The main building was a rounded hut, with walls made from woven branches covered in thick layers of clay and dried plant fiber. And its roof was a masterpiece of overlapping bark sheets, sealed with sticky plant resin that kept out even the heaviest acid rains. "This is impossible," the lead analyst muttered for the 100th time, watching Elias work on yet another improvement to his settlement. He has no blueprints, no measuring tools, no engineering software. How does he know how to build these things? The elderly scholar, whose name was Velith, had become the most dedicated observer of the human's progress. She rarely left the monitoring station now, and she had begun documenting everything in detailed notes. "He does not need software," she explained quietly. "The blueprints are stored in something far more powerful, his species memory." Elias was currently constructing a food storage building, and his techniques showed the accumulated wisdom of countless human generations. He dug a pit into the hillside where the natural cool temperature of the earth would keep food fresh. He lined the walls with flat stones to prevent moisture from seeping in. He built ventilation channels that allowed air to flow through while keeping out insects and small animals. At night, his main dwelling was warm despite the deadly cold outside. He had built what the Valkyrie eventually learned to call a thermal mass heating system, a raised bed of flat stones positioned above a channel that connected to his fire pit. When he burned fuel, the heat traveled through the channel and warmed the stones, which then released that warmth slowly throughout the night. "This design is incredibly efficient," a young Valkyrie engineer admitted reluctantly. "He loses almost no heat to the outside environment. Our climate control systems achieve similar results, but they require constant power input. His system requires no power at all," Velas pointed out. "Once the stones are heated, they work automatically. It is elegant in its simplicity." The acid rain season had been the true test of Elias's engineering skills, and he had passed it brilliantly. When the first burning rains fell from the sky, he had already prepared his defenses. His roof was angled to shed water quickly, and channels carved into the ground directed the runoff away from his living areas and into collection basins. "He is capturing the acid rain," an analyst observed with confusion. "Why would he want to collect something so dangerous?" The answer became clear over the following weeks. Elias had discovered that certain types of soil and crusite minerals could neutralize the acid, turning the deadly rain into harmless water. He had built filtration systems using layers of these materials, and now he had a reliable supply of clean water even during the harshest storms. But perhaps his most impressive achievement was the garden. Elias had identified several local plants that were edible to humans, and he had begun cultivating them in raised beds near his settlement. He composted waste material to create rich soil, designed irrigation systems that delivered water directly to plant roots, and built protective covers that shielded young plants from extreme temperatures. "He is creating agriculture," Velas said, her voice filled with something that sounded almost like awe. "He is not just surviving, he is establishing a permanent food supply." The Velthry Council had originally expected the broadcast to show human weakness and failure, but something unexpected was happening instead. Across the Dominion, viewership had exploded, and the reactions were not what the Council had anticipated. Young Velthry were fascinated by Elias's techniques. They formed discussion groups online, analyzing his building methods and debating the principles behind his designs. Some began attempting to recreate his simpler inventions, using natural materials in ways that their technology-focused education had never taught them. "This is becoming a cultural problem," a council advisor warned during an emergency meeting. "The human survival is undermining our core philosophy. Our society believes that progress means transcending nature, but this primitive creature is showing our people something different. He is showing them that nature can be a partner instead of an enemy," another advisor growled. "It is a dangerous idea." On Kareth 7, Elias was unaware of the chaos his survival was causing. He was focused on a new project building, a workshop where he could create more advanced tools and equipment. He had discovered a type of clay that hardened when heated, and he was experimenting with creating pottery for cooking and storage. He had found plant fibers that could be woven into fabric, and he was slowly teaching himself the ancient arts of spinning and weaving. His camp had attracted the attention of local wildlife, and instead of simply driving them away, Elias had begun studying their behavior. He noticed that certain creatures could predict weather changes, and he learned to read their movements as early warning signs of storms. He observed which animals were dangerous and which were merely curious, adjusting his defenses accordingly. One creature in particular had become a regular visitor, a small, six-legged mammal with soft gray fur and intelligent eyes. Elias had started leaving food scraps for it, and over time the animal had become almost tame, approaching his campfire without fear. "He is domesticating local fauna," an analyst reported with disbelief. "No species has ever successfully domesticated Karethi wildlife before." "That is because no species has ever tried his approach," Velas replied. "He is not forcing compliance through technology. He is building trust through patience and kindness." As the months continued to pass, Elias's settlement grew more sophisticated. He built a bathhouse near a hot spring, creating a space where he could clean himself and relax in warm water. He constructed a covered walkway between his buildings, protecting himself from rain and sun as he moved around his property. He even created a small shrine where he placed interesting stones and beautiful fungal growths, a touch of art and beauty in his functional world. The Velthry watching his progress were divided in their reactions. Some dismissed his achievements as primitive mimicry of real civilization. Others argued that his methods represented a form of intelligence their species had never properly understood. But one reaction was universal. No one was laughing anymore. "We made a mistake," Velas told her colleagues during a late-night discussion. "We thought we were demonstrating human weakness, but we have actually demonstrated something far more troubling." "What do you mean?" a young analyst asked. "We have shown the galaxy that a single human, stripped of all technology and abandoned on an impossible world, can not only survive but thrive, Velith explained. We have proven that their adaptability is not a myth. It is perhaps the most dangerous ability any species has ever evolved. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If one human could achieve so much with nothing, what could billions of humans achieve with the resources of an entire galaxy? It was a question that the Velthari High Council was beginning to ask, and the answers they were imagining terrified them. 1 full year had passed on Kareth 7, and what had once been a desperate survival situation had transformed into something that looked remarkably like a home. Elias stood on the ridge above his settlement as the sun rose, surveying everything he had built, and a feeling of quiet pride filled his chest. Below him, the settlement had grown into a small village of interconnected structures. There was the main dwelling with its sophisticated heating system and waterproof roof. There was the food storage building with its cool underground chambers filled with preserved meats, dried fruits, and fermented vegetables. There was the workshop where clay pots and woven baskets and stone tools lined the shelves. There was the bathhouse with steam rising gently from its heated pool. Most recently, he had completed a garden terrace system on the hillside, using carefully constructed walls to create level planting areas that captured rainwater and prevented soil erosion. Young plants were already sprouting in neat rows, promising a harvest that would sustain him through the harsh seasons ahead. The small, gray creature he had befriended, which he called Scout for its habit of investigating. Everything sat on a rock nearby, watching him with curious eyes. It had become his constant companion, warning him of approaching predators and keeping him company during the long, lonely nights. Not bad for a primitive species, right? Elias said to Scout, who chittered in response as if agreeing far across the galaxy. The broadcast of Elias's survival had become the most watched program in Velthari history. What had started as entertainment had evolved into something far more significant, a cultural phenomenon that was reshaping how an entire civilization thought about progress and intelligence. Underground communities had formed, dedicated to studying and recreating human primitive techniques. Young Velthari built shelters from natural materials in hidden locations, learning skills that their ancestors had abandoned millions of years ago. Philosophers wrote essays questioning whether technology had made their species stronger or merely more dependent. Artists created works inspired by the elegant simplicity of human solutions. This has gone too far, High Arbiter Thesic declared during an emergency session of the Dominion Council. The human was supposed to demonstrate weakness, not inspire revolution. The damage is already done, an advisor argued. Ending the broadcast now would only make him a martyr. It would prove that we fear what he represents. Then we must end the human himself, Thesic said coldly. Not publicly, that would be too obvious. We will send a team to eliminate him quietly and claim that the planet's dangers finally overcame him. Some council members objected, warning that assassination would be discovered eventually and could provoke conflict with humanity. But Thesic dismissed their concerns with a wave of her clawed hand. The humans will never know, she insisted. They will simply believe that their pilot died on a hostile world, which is what should have happened from the beginning. Secret orders were transmitted to a special operations team. Travel to Kareth 7. Eliminate the human, destroy any evidence of advanced intervention, and return before anyone could suspect the truth. But the Council's communications were not as secure as they believed. Velith, the elderly scholar who had spent a year studying Elias, had grown increasingly troubled by the direction her government was taking. She had installed monitoring software on the classified channels, hoping to learn what the Council planned to do, and what she discovered horrified her. They are going to murder him, she whispered to herself as she read the assassination orders. They are going to kill him not because he failed, but because he succeeded too well. She knew she should stay silent. Speaking against the council was dangerous, and helping a human could be considered treason. But something had changed inside her during the past year of observation. She had watched Ilias face impossible challenges with patience and creativity, and she had come to respect him in ways she had never respected anyone before. Meanwhile, on Kareth 7, a far more immediate threat demanded Ilias's attention. The great storm season had arrived. For 40 days, the planet would be battered by the most violent weather in its annual cycle. Winds that could knock down trees, rain so acidic it could eat through unprepared materials, temperatures that swung wildly between deadly extremes. The great storm season had killed every expedition the Valkyrie had ever sent to the planet. Ilias had been preparing for months, but as the first storm clouds gathered on the horizon, he felt the cold grip of fear in his stomach. This would be the ultimate test of everything he had learned and built. "Time to find out if I really know what I'm doing," he muttered to Scout, who had pressed against his leg as if sensing the danger approaching. The first storm hit like a fist from an angry god. Wind screamed across the landscape, tearing at Ilias's carefully constructed buildings. Acid rain poured from the sky in sheets so thick he could barely see. Thunder shook the ground beneath his feet. But his preparations held. The reinforced walls of his dwelling bent, but did not break. The drainage channels carried the acid rain away from his foundations. The sealed roof kept the interior dry, even as the storm raged outside. For 3 days, Ilias huddled in his shelter with Scout, venturing out only during brief breaks in the weather to check on his other structures. The food storage building was secure. The workshop had lost some roofing but remained mostly intact. The garden terraces were flooded, but their walls prevented catastrophic erosion. When the first storm finally passed, Ilias immediately began repair work. He reinforced weak points, improved drainage systems, and added additional supports to structures that had shown stress. He was not just fixing damage, he was learning from it, making everything stronger for the storms still to come. Storm after storm battered his settlement, and each time Ilias adapted and improved. He discovered that certain plants could be woven into flexible mats that absorbed wind force without breaking. He learned that positioning heavy stones on his roof prevented wind from lifting it. He found that the thermal vents could be partially blocked to increase warmth during the coldest periods. By the time the 40th day arrived and the final storm clouds dispersed, Ilias's settlement was not just intact, it was better than before. He survived the great storm season, a Valkyrie analyst reported with undisguised amazement. No one has ever done that without advanced technology. No one. In the observation center, Velith watched the feeds with tears forming in her yellow eyes. She had come to care about this strange, resilient creature, and the knowledge that assassins were coming to kill him filled her with grief and rage. But grief and rage could become action. Velith began downloading files, gathering evidence, making plans. If the council wanted to murder an innocent being just for proving them wrong, then she would not remain silent. She would not be complicit. The assassination team was already en route to Kareth 7. They would arrive in less than a week, equipped with weapons and orders to make the killing look natural. They expected to find an exhausted survivor barely clinging to life after the storm season. They had no idea what was actually waiting for them. And neither did they know that Velith was already racing toward the planet in a small personal vessel, carrying evidence that could expose the Council's crimes and a determination to save the human who had taught her species more about true intelligence than all their technology ever had. The game was about to change in ways that no one could predict. The Valkyrie assassination team landed on Kareth 7 at dawn, their sleek shuttle touching down on the same plateau where Ilias had been abandoned 1 year ago. There were 5 of them, elite soldiers trained in covert elimination, equipped with weapons that could kill quickly and leave no evidence of advanced technology. The target should be weakened from the storm season, the team leader said as they checked their equipment. We move fast, eliminate him, stage the scene to look like a predator attack, and extract before anyone notices. They moved through the fungal forest with professional silence, following the signal from the surveillance drones to Elias's settlement. But as they approached the location, something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet, and they could find no sign of the desperate survivor they had expected. What they found instead was a fortified village that looked like it had been there for decades. Strong walls surrounded cultivated gardens. Smoke rose from a well-constructed chimney. A cleared path led between multiple buildings that showed sophisticated design and careful maintenance. "This is impossible," one soldier whispered. He was supposed to be barely surviving. "Mission parameters have not changed," the leader replied coldly. "We find him and we kill him. The quality of his shelter makes no difference." But Elias had been watching them since they landed. He had learned to read the behavior of local wildlife, and when every creature in the forest suddenly went silent at the same time, he knew something dangerous had arrived. When he spotted the 5 Velthari moving through the trees with weapons drawn, he understood exactly what they had come to do. "They finally decided I was too dangerous to leave alive," he muttered to Scout, who was hiding under his bed. "Well, they should have come sooner." 1 year on Kareth 7 had transformed Elias from a desperate survivor into something far more formidable. He knew every rock and tree within miles of his settlement. He knew which plants were poisonous and which animals were territorial. He knew how sound traveled through the fungal forest and where shadows could hide a waiting figure. The planet was no longer his prison. It was his ally. The first soldier fell into a pit trap that Elias had dug weeks ago to catch predators. Sharpened stakes at the bottom did their work silently, and his screams were muffled by the thick fungal walls. "Callan is down," a soldier reported frantically. "Some kind of primitive trap. I cannot reach him." "Maintain formation," the leader ordered. The human cannot have many tricks like that. But Elias had dozens of tricks, and he used them all. He led the soldiers through areas where the ground was unstable, watching as one stumbled and twisted her ankle on hidden roots. He used animal calls to summon a pack of territorial creatures that saw the Velthari as invaders in their hunting grounds. He threw stones to create sounds that made the assassins fire their weapons at shadows, wasting ammunition and revealing their positions. "Where is he?" a soldier shouted, spinning in circles with her weapon raised. "I cannot find any trail. It is like he has become invisible." "He has not become invisible," the leader realized with growing horror. "He has become part of this world. We are not hunting him. He is hunting us." One by one, the assassination team fell. Not to direct combat, but to a hostile environment that obeyed Elias's commands. One soldier ran into a patch of plants that released paralyzing spores. Another was ambushed by predators that Elias had learned to attract using specific sounds. A third simply got lost in the maze-like forest and collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration. Finally, only the team leader remained. She had made it to Elias's settlement, determined to complete her mission, even if she had to die doing it. She found him standing calmly in front of his main dwelling, unarmed, watching her approach. "You are going to kill me now?" Elias asked without fear. "After everything your people watched me accomplish, you are going to murder me to protect your fragile beliefs? You have caused too much disruption," the leader snarled, raising her weapon. "The council has ordered your death, and I will obey." "Your council is afraid of ideas," Elias replied. "They are afraid that their people will learn there are other ways to be intelligent, other ways to live. They would rather commit murder than admit they might be wrong. Enough talking." The leader's finger tightened on the trigger, but before she could fire, a stunning blast hit her from behind, and she collapsed to the ground. Veleth stepped out from the shadows, holding a stun weapon and breathing heavily from her long run through the forest. She had arrived just in time, landing her small vessel on the far side of the ridge and racing to intercept the assassination before it could be completed. "Who are you?" Elias asked, staring at the Velthary who had just saved his life. "My name is Velith," she replied. "I have been watching you for an entire year, studying your techniques and learning from your wisdom. I could not let them destroy everything you have taught us." She explained the Council's secret orders, showed him the evidence she had gathered, and offered to take him away from Kareth 7 to safety among humans who would welcome him home. But Elias shook his head. "This is my home now," he said, looking around at the settlement he had built with his own hands. "I did not survive everything this planet threw at me just to run away." "Then what do you want to do?" Velith asked. Elias was quiet for a long moment, thinking about everything he had experienced and everything he had learned. Then a smile crossed his face, the same confident smile that had confused the Velthary judges so long ago. "Your people watched me survive," he said. "They watched me build and create and solve problems. But watching is not the same as understanding. If they truly want to learn what humans know, they should come here and learn it directly." "You want to teach them?" Velith asked in surprise. "I want to share knowledge," Elias replied. "Not just my knowledge, but the knowledge of thousands of human generations. Your species forgot how to work with nature, but maybe they can remember if someone shows them the way." The broadcast resumed, but now it showed something very different. Elias stood before a camera with Velith translating his words, and he spoke to the entire Velthary Dominion. "You tried to kill me by taking away my technology," he said. "But technology is not what makes a species intelligent. Intelligence is about understanding the world around you and finding creative solutions to problems. It is about adapting to challenges instead of trying to dominate them." He gestured at his settlement, at the gardens and buildings and innovations that had grown from nothing. "Everything you see here came from knowledge that humans have gathered over 200,000 years of survival. We did not transcend nature. We learned to dance with it. I am not going to leave this world," he continued. "Kareth 7 is my home now, and I will stay here. But if any of you want to learn what I know, you are welcome to come here. Not as guards or observers, as students." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, the first Velthary volunteers began arriving on Kareth 7, curious young people who wanted to learn the skills that their species had forgotten. They were awkward at first, struggling with concepts their technology-focused education had never taught them, but they learned. 6 months later, the settlement had grown into a small community. Velthary worked alongside their human teacher, building structures from natural materials, cultivating gardens, creating tools with their own hands. They learned to read weather patterns and understand animal behavior. They discovered the deep satisfaction of creating something from nothing. In the Dominion archives, Velith officially submitted a report reclassifying humanity based on everything she had observed and learned. The old classification had read, primitive species, threat level minimal. The new classification read, adaptive apex generalists, threat level undefined. Note, consider alliance rather than opposition. The High Council that had ordered Elias's death was quietly removed from power, replaced by younger leaders who saw opportunity rather than threat in human Velthary cooperation. The assassination attempt was exposed and condemned. New policies were established to promote understanding between species. And on Kareth 7, the world the Velthary had called impossible, a human and his alien students sat around the fire one evening, sharing food and stories and laughter. Scout, the small gray creature, sat in Elias's lap, purring contentedly. "You know what the funny thing is?" Elias said, looking up at the unfamiliar stars. "When they dropped me here, I was terrified. I thought I was going to die." "What changed?" a young Velthary student asked, I remembered who I was, Elias replied. Not just Elias Vance, crashed pilot, but a human, the descendant of every survivor who ever lived, carrying the knowledge of everyone who came before me. Once I remembered that, I knew I could handle anything. He poked the fire and watched sparks rise into the night sky. That is what I want to teach all of you, he continued. Not just how to build shelters or start fires. I want to teach you that intelligence is not about the tools you have. It is about the spirit that refuses to give up, no matter what challenges you face. The students nodded thoughtfully, and the fire crackled. And somewhere in the darkness, Scout made a happy sound. The impossible world had become home. The exile had become a teacher. And the lesson that one human had taught an entire civilization would echo through the galaxy for generations to come.